In the quiet town of Fairview, nestled between rolling hills and whispering forests, Sheriff Clayton Marshall was a symbol of safety. To the townspeople, he was more than just a man in uniform. He was a husband, a father, and a steadfast protector of their way of life. Every morning, neighbors greeted him with warm smiles, trusting that his badge represented integrity and justice. But beneath the surface of Fairview's idyllic facade, a storm was brewing, one that would expose the deepest betrayal the town had ever known. Among the residents was Monique Ellis, a bright and ambitious 17-year-old with a spark that made her stand out. She was close to Ella, the sheriff's youngest daughter, and often spent afternoons at the Marshall home, laughing and planning futures they couldn't yet imagine. Monique dreamed of following in the footsteps of her father, Jerome Ellis, a deputy who had served under Clayton for years. She envisioned a life of purpose, perhaps working for the FBI or Secret Service one day. But dreams often exist alongside shadows, and Monique's life would soon be consumed by one. It started innocently enough. Sheriff Marshall, impressed by Monique's ambition, offered to mentor her, a gesture of kindness that no one questioned. After all, Clayton was like a second father to her. He had been there when she was born, celebrated her birthdays, and encouraged her dreams. The first few meetings were professional. Clayton shared stories of his early days in law enforcement, the challenges he faced, and the lessons he learned. Monique listened intently, soaking in his advice like a sponge. To her, these sessions were invaluable, a chance to gain insight from someone who had built a career out of serving others. But slowly, the nature of their interactions began to shift. Clayton's compliments grew more personal. He noticed things no one else did, the way she carried herself, the determination in her eyes. His questions, once centered on her goals, veered into her personal life, her relationships, her fears, and her deepest insecurities. Monique, eager to please and grateful for his guidance, answered honestly, never suspecting that each word she shared tightened the invisible web Clayton was weaving around her. For Clayton, what began as admiration morphed into something darker. He told himself it was harmless, a fleeting infatuation, a harmless indulgence. But as days turned into weeks, his thoughts became consumed by Monique. He orchestrated more frequent meetings, ensuring they were alone under the guise of mentorship. One evening, as they sat in his office discussing career paths, Clayton leaned in closer than usual. "You've got potential, Monique," he said, his voice low and steady. "With the right guidance, you could go far, further than you even imagine." Monique smiled, her cheeks flushing at the praise. "Thank you, Sheriff. That means a lot coming from you." The look in Clayton's eyes lingered a moment too long. Monique, oblivious to the shift, continued to talk about her dreams, unaware of the line that had just been crossed. Clayton's mentorship soon became a secretive arrangement. He framed their sessions as something special, exclusive lessons that no one else could offer. "You don't need distractions," he told her. "The fewer people who know, the better." Monique, trusting him implicitly, agreed. She believed his secrecy was meant to protect her ambition, not realizing it was shielding something far more sinister. As weeks passed, the meetings grew more intimate. Clayton blurred the boundaries between mentor and confidant, drawing Monique deeper into his world. She felt special, chosen, and Clayton ensured she stayed that way. He planted subtle doubts in her mind about her friends, her father, even Ella, isolating her from those who might have seen the truth. But the truth, as it always does, was waiting to reveal itself. One fateful night, Monique arrived at Clayton's office for what she believed was another mentoring session. Clayton greeted her with his usual calm demeanor, but beneath the surface, his thoughts churned. That evening, Clayton crossed the final boundary. What began as a misplaced compliment became an unwanted advance, and in her confusion and shock, Monique found herself unable to process what had just happened. The weeks that followed were a blur for Monique. She distanced herself from everyone, including Ella. Her once bright spirit dimmed, replaced by a quiet, haunted look that no one could ignore. But when she finally found the courage to confront Clayton about what had transpired, the situation spiraled further out of control. Monique's growing unease couldn't remain unnoticed for long. Her once inseparable bond with Ella frayed as she became withdrawn, her laughter replaced by vacant stares. At home, her father, Jerome Ellis, sensed something was amiss. He had always been close to Monique, their bond built on trust and shared dreams. But now, every attempt he made to connect with her was met with deflection or silence. "You've been so distant, Monique," Jerome said one evening, his voice heavy with concern. "Is something going on? You know you can talk to me." Monique forced a smile, shaking her head. "It's just school, Dad. I've got a lot on my plate." Jerome didn't believe her, but he didn't press further. He decided to keep an eye on her, not knowing that the truth was far darker than he could imagine. Monique's world began to crumble when she discovered she was pregnant. The revelation hit her like a tidal wave, leaving her reeling with fear and confusion. She couldn't bring herself to tell her parents, let alone Ella. The only person she felt she could turn to was Clayton, the man who had promised to guide her but had instead led her into a nightmare. One evening, she confronted him during one of their secret meetings. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "I'm pregnant." Clayton froze, the weight of her words crashing down on him. For a moment he said nothing, his mind racing through the implications. His career, his marriage, his reputation, everything he had worked for was now on the brink of destruction. "You need to take care of it," Clayton said finally, his tone cold and detached. Monique stared at him, her heart shattering. "Take care of it," she repeated. "You're asking me to?" "There's no other way," Clayton interrupted, his voice rising. "If this gets out, it'll ruin both of us." Tears welled in Monique's eyes. "This is our child," she said softly. "You promised you'd be there for me." Clayton's composure cracked. "You don't understand what's at stake," he snapped. "Do what you need to do, Monique. End this." But Monique refused. She left that night, clutching her secret close, unaware that her defiance would seal her fate. Monique vanished 3 days later. The town was thrown into chaos as news of her disappearance spread. Jerome Ellis was the first to report her missing, his voice trembling as he spoke to the dispatcher. "She didn't come home last night," he said. "This isn't like her. Something's wrong." Clayton took charge of the investigation, wearing his mask of professionalism as he directed deputies and volunteers. He comforted Jerome and Denise Ellis, promising them, "We'll find her. I won't rest until we bring her home." But behind the scenes, Clayton was orchestrating a cover-up. He steered the investigation away from the areas he knew they shouldn't search, planting false leads and diverting attention with fabricated sightings. To the townspeople, he was a hero, a man determined to bring a beloved girl back to her family. But the truth was buried deep, both literally and figuratively. Weeks turned into months, and hope began to fade. Monique's name lingered in whispered conversations, her absence a ghost that haunted the town. The search efforts dwindled, and many began to accept that she might never be found. But fate had other plans. 2 hikers, exploring a remote forest trail on the outskirts of town, stumbled upon a patch of disturbed earth. At first they thought nothing of it, perhaps an animal had been digging. But as they looked closer, they noticed a fragment of fabric poking through the dirt. Unease settled over them as they marked the location and called the authorities. Within hours, a team of forensic investigators was on the scene. The discovery they made shattered the town's fragile sense of normalcy. It was Monique. Her body, wrapped carefully in a tarp, was unearthed from a shallow grave. The coroner's report would later confirm she had been drugged before her death, her body showing no signs of struggle. But the most chilling revelation was yet to come. Monique had been pregnant at the time of her murder. The discovery reignited the investigation, and detectives began piecing together the timeline of Monique's final days. GPS data from her phone revealed her movements leading up to her disappearance, including a late-night stop at a remote gas station. Surveillance footage from the station showed Clayton's truck in the parking lot, Monique slumped in the passenger seat. The evidence was damning. It painted a picture of premeditation and deceit, a trusted sheriff using his position to cover his tracks. But the most incriminating piece of evidence came from the forensic team, a small vial found near Monique's grave, bearing Clayton's fingerprint. As the investigation closed in on him, Clayton's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. His family, his wife Sharon, and daughters Ella and Harper, watched in horror as the truth came to light. The man they loved, the man they trusted, was a monster hiding behind a badge. Clayton was arrested in his office, the click of handcuffs echoing through the quiet building. He said nothing as deputies, once his loyal colleagues, escorted him past the desks where he had once commanded respect. His trial became a national spectacle, every sordid detail of his crimes laid bare for the world to see. Jerome and Denise Ellis sat in the front row of the courtroom every day, their grief etched into their faces. They listened as prosecutors described how Clayton had manipulated their daughter, exploited her trust, and silenced her to protect his own secrets. Clayton confessed on the stand, his voice shaking as he admitted to his crimes. "I was scared," he said. "I didn't know what else to do." But fear was no excuse. The judge, his voice heavy with the weight of the verdict, sentenced Clayton Marshall to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The town of Fairview was forever changed by Monique's death. The Ellis family, determined to honor her memory, founded the Monique Ellis Foundation to support young women and hold those in power accountable. The sheriff's office underwent sweeping reforms, implementing new safeguards to prevent abuses of authority. But for Monique's family, the scars remained. They mourned not only their daughter, but the grandchild they would never know. And though justice had been served, the loss of Monique was a wound that would never fully heal. Fairview was a town that prided itself on its close-knit community, but the revelation of Clayton Marshall's crimes sent shockwaves through its core. People who had once shared warm greetings with him now spoke in hushed tones, their voices tinged with anger and disbelief. The Marshall family bore the brunt of the fallout. Sharon Marshall, Clayton's wife, could no longer step outside without facing judgmental stares and whispers. The man she had shared her life with, the father of her children, was now a convicted murderer. Ella and Harper Marshall struggled to process the reality of their father's actions. For Ella, the betrayal cut especially deep. Monique had been her best friend, her confidant, and now she was gone, taken by the man Ella had idolized. The weight of Clayton's betrayal fractured the family, leaving them to pick up the pieces of a life that no longer felt real. Jerome and Denise Ellis channeled their grief into action. They established the Monique Ellis Foundation, an organization dedicated to preventing abuse of power and supporting young women who had been victimized. The foundation offered scholarships, mentorship programs, and legal aid to those in need. The Ellis family traveled across the country, speaking at schools, law enforcement agencies, and community centers. They shared Monique's story not just as a cautionary tale, but as a call to action. "We trusted someone who wore a badge," Jerome would say, his voice steady but filled with sorrow, "and that trust was betrayed. We can't let it happen again." The foundation quickly gained national attention, becoming a symbol of resilience and accountability. For Jerome and Denise, it was a way to ensure that Monique's life and her tragic death would leave a lasting impact. As Clayton Marshall sat in his prison cell, the legal battle continued. Civil lawsuits were filed against him by the Ellis family and others in the community who felt the ripple effects of his actions. The lawsuits targeted both Clayton and the sheriff's office, accusing them of negligence and complicity in enabling his abuses. Inside the courtroom, testimonies from deputies painted a picture of a man who had long blurred the lines of professionalism. Subtle warning signs, moments when Clayton had overstepped his boundaries, were brought to light. Some deputies admitted they had noticed his behavior, but dismissed it, believing he was simply mentoring Monique. The sheriff's office faced harsh scrutiny, and policies were overhauled in the aftermath. Mandatory ethics training and stricter oversight of mentorship programs were implemented. Clayton's case became a textbook example of what could happen when power went unchecked. Months turned into years, but the pain of Monique's loss remained fresh for many in Fairview. Her absence was felt in the small moments, the empty chair at family dinners, the silence that filled the spaces where her laughter used to echo. Ella struggled to navigate her grief, often visiting Monique's favorite spots around town. Sitting by the lake they used to visit as kids, she would talk to Monique as if she were still there. "I'm so sorry," she whispered one evening, her voice breaking. "I should have known something was wrong." But healing, though slow, began to take root. The Ellis family found comfort in the support of their community and the work of the foundation. Sharon Marshall, too, began rebuilding her life, moving to a new town with her daughters and starting over away from the shadow of Clayton's crimes. Fairview learned from its scars. The story of Clayton Marshall became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and the importance of holding even the most trusted individuals accountable. The Monique Ellis Foundation continued to grow, offering hope and resources to countless young women. Its annual gala became a celebration of Monique's life, featuring stories of resilience and triumph from those the foundation had helped. Though her life was cut short, Monique's legacy lived on through the lives she touched and the change she inspired. On the anniversary of Clayton's conviction, a small ceremony was held at the foundation's headquarters. Jerome Ellis stood before a crowd, his voice steady as he addressed them. "Monique believed in justice," he said. "She believed in standing up for what was right. Today we honor her by continuing that fight. No one, no matter how powerful or trusted, is above the law." As the crowd applauded, Jerome glanced at the portrait of Monique displayed behind him. Her smile was frozen in time, a reminder of the bright future she had once dreamed of. And though the pain of her loss would never fully fade, her story served as a beacon of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, justice could prevail.